The lock clicked shut behind her, a sound as final as a coffin lid. Rain slicked the polished marble steps of the New York City brownstone, making them treacherous. He didn't even give her a coat. Julian Thorne, the man she had loved, the man who had molded her and then broken her, stood silhouetted in the doorway, a figure of pure, cold indifference. He had cast her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart shattered into a million pieces, calling her his greatest failed project. But they never imagined that the woman they threw away would return not as a beggar, but as the bride of a man whose name made emperors tremble. How does a forgotten wife left with nothing come to stand at the pinnacle of power? This is the story of Amelia Thorne's fall and the spectacular rise of Amelia Sterling. The late September air in Manhattan had a bite to it, a promise of the brutal winter to come. For Amelia, the cold was already bone deep. She stood on the sidewalk of East 72nd Street, the fine wool of her dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin, now damp with a mixture of rain and tears. The door to her life, the life she'd known for 5 years, had been slammed and locked. Inside was every memory, every piece of her identity, every book she'd ever loved. Outside was nothing. Julian Thorne hadn't just divorced her, he had surgically excised her from his world. He was a rising star in private equity, a disciple of the Blackstone School of Corporate Rating, and he believed in ruthless efficiency. Amelia, the quiet art history graduate from a state school in Ohio, had been his passion project. He'd found her working at a small gallery, loved her raw intelligence, and decided to polish her. He taught her which fork to use, which designers to wear, and which opinions to have. In return, she had loved him with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. She had believed his critiques were for her own good, his controlling nature a form of protection. The end came swiftly. Julian was closing a deal that would make him a partner at his firm, a deal with a powerful old-money family from Boston. They had a daughter perfect and pedigreed with a trust fund that could swallow Julian's net worth whole. Amelia, with her humble origins and quiet passions, was suddenly a liability. "You just don't fit anymore, Amelia." He'd said that morning, his voice devoid of emotion as he sipped his single-origin espresso. "We're moving in different circles now. I need a partner, not a student. You were a wonderful project, but the project is over." She had tried to argue, to remind him of their vows, of the nights she'd stayed up helping him with presentations, of the genuine love she felt for him. He had simply laughed, a short barking sound. "Love, Amelia, this was an arrangement. You got a taste of a life you could never have dreamed of, and I had a beautiful, adoring woman on my arm. The arrangement is terminated." His mother, Veronica Thorne, a woman who looked as if she were carved from ice, had overseen the eviction. She'd walked through the house, pointing at items with a manicured finger. "That's a Thorne family heirloom. That was a gift to my son." "Her personal effects are negligible, I assume," she'd said to the housekeeper, not even looking at Amelia. They had allowed her one small box. A few books, a framed photo of her late parents, and her grandmother's locket. As she stood on the street clutching the soggy cardboard, Julian's parting words echoed in her ears. "Go back to whatever provincial life you crawled out of. It's where you belong." She had nowhere to go. Her parents were gone, and her only living relative was an aunt in a nursing home. The friends she'd made in New York were Julian's friends, their loyalty bought and paid for. Her bank account, a joint one, had been frozen. He'd left her with $87 in her purse. A taxi hissed past, splashing grimy water onto her ankles. Humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, coiling sickness in her stomach. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was erased. Julian hadn't just taken her home, he had taken her name, her confidence, her future. As she huddled under the awning of a closed bakery, shivering, she made a silent, desperate vow. She didn't know how, but she would not be broken. She would survive. And one day Julian Thorne would remember her name. The first few weeks were a blur of cheap motel rooms paid for in cash, lukewarm coffee, and the constant gnawing fear of the future. Amelia sold the last piece of her old life, a pair of diamond earrings Julian had given her for their first anniversary, for a pittance at a pawn shop. It was enough for a security deposit on a tiny walk-up apartment in Queens, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The silence was the hardest part. The brownstone had always been filled with noise. Julian's conference calls, the clatter of the housekeeper, the hum of the city. Here, the only sound was the drip of a leaky faucet and the frantic beating of her own heart. She spent days applying for jobs, her resume feeling like a work of fiction. Personal assistant to Julian Thorne. Household manager. Event coordinator for Thorne social functions. Everything was tied to him. The rejections were polite but firm. No one in that rarefied world wanted Julian Thorne's discarded wife. Desperate, she reached back into her past to the one place Julian hadn't been able to touch: her education. She found an email address for Dr. Alistair Finch, her old art history professor, a man who had once told her she had a rare and intuitive eye for provenance. She wrote him a carefully worded email, omitting the humiliating details of her divorce, and simply stated she was seeking opportunities in the art world again. To her surprise, he replied within an hour. He remembered her. He mentioned a position he'd heard about, nothing glamorous, he warned. It was a contract role in the archives of the Morgan Library and Museum, specifically for a new acquisition of a lesser-known Renaissance benefactor's correspondence. The pay was abysmal, the work tedious. It was a job for a graduate student, not a woman who had until recently worn Chanel to lunch. Amelia took it without a second thought. The archives were a quiet, dusty sanctuary. Her world shrank to the smell of aging paper, the soft scratch of her pencil, and the intricate loops of 500-year-old Italian script. Her job was to catalog, cross-reference, and translate letters looking for mentions of art commissions or transactions. It was painstaking, methodical work that forced her to focus on something other than the gaping wound in her life. For months, her life consisted of the subway ride to Manhattan, 8 hours in the hushed silence of the archives, and the subway ride back to her empty apartment. She slowly rebuilt a routine. She stopped thinking about what Julian was doing, who he was with. The shame began to recede, replaced by a quiet, fierce pride in her work. She rediscovered the passion Julian had tried to extinguish. He had called her love for art a quaint little hobby. Here in the archives, it was her lifeline. One rainy afternoon, she was working on a particularly dense bundle of letters from a Florentine banker. Everyone else had dismissed them as dry financial records. But Amelia's intuition, the one Dr. Finch had praised, kicked in. She noticed a recurring symbol watermarked on the paper, one she didn't recognize. She also noticed that certain phrases seemingly about wool and dye shipments were repeated with odd, unnatural frequency. It was a code. She spent the next 3 weeks of her own time late nights in her tiny apartment, surrounded by history books and cryptography primers, trying to crack it. Finally, she did. The letters weren't about textiles. They were a hidden ledger detailing the secret patronage of a reclusive sculptor, a contemporary of Donatello, who was thought to have produced only a handful of works. These letters detailed the locations of 3 lost bronze statues, masterpieces no one knew existed. She knew what she had found was monumental. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a discovery that could rewrite a chapter of art history and be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. For the first time in a long time, Amelia felt a surge of power. It wasn't Julian's power, borrowed and temporary. It was hers, earned. She typed up her findings into a formal report, her hands trembling slightly. She had a choice. She could give this to the museum, where it would be absorbed by the institution, and she would get a footnote in an academic journal. Or she could do something else. Something bolder. She thought of Julian's dismissive laugh. A quaint little hobby. She began researching the world's most powerful and discreet art collectors. Men who operated outside the traditional auction houses, who valued secrecy and, above all, a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. One name kept appearing whispered in articles and forums with a kind of reverence and fear: Damien Blackwood. Damien Blackwood was less a man and more a myth in the worlds of finance and art. His firm Sterling Global was a leviathan with interests in everything from renewable energy to satellite technology. He was notoriously private, a ghost who moved between his homes in London, Tokyo, and New York. But his one known obsession was art, specifically lost or disputed pieces from the Italian Renaissance. He didn't just collect, he hunted. Getting to a man like Damien Blackwood was next to impossible. He was insulated by layers of assistants, lawyers, and security. Amelia spent a week trying to find a way in, hitting one dead end after another. Then she found a name in an old art world directory: Harrison Vance, the curator of the Blackwood collection. He was giving a lecture at the Frick collection in 2 days. Amelia used the last of her savings to buy a simple but elegant navy blue dress from a consignment shop. She spent hours on her hair and makeup, not trying to look like the woman Julian had styled, but like a serious, confident professional. She looked in the mirror and saw for the first time in a year a glimmer of the woman she used to be, but stronger, her eyes holding a new steely resolve. At the lecture, she listened intently, waiting for the Q&A. When it came, she didn't ask a question. She made a statement. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice clear and steady in the silent hall. "Your point about the influence of Medici banking practices on the patronage of minor sculptors is fascinating. However, it overlooks the coded ledgers used by bankers like the Bardi family to conceal transactions for politically sensitive artists, a practice which has led to a significant underestimation of the oeuvres of masters like Niccolò de Conti." A murmur went through the audience. Harrison Vance, a portly man with a perpetually skeptical expression, peered at her over his glasses. "That is a rather bold and unsubstantiated theory. Miss Sterling," she said, using her mother's maiden name for the first time. "A clean break. Amelia Sterling. And I have the substantiation." After the lecture, Vance cornered her, his skepticism warring with his professional curiosity. Amelia gave him nothing but a single tantalizing page of her translated notes. "This is part of a larger discovery," she said calmly. "I believe it will be of specific interest to Mr. Blackwood. If he wishes to see the rest, he can contact me directly." She gave him her card, a simple one she'd had printed that morning with just her name, email, and number. Then she walked away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was the biggest gamble of her life. For 2 days there was nothing. Amelia began to despair, the brief surge of confidence draining away, leaving the familiar dregs of doubt. Then on the 3rd day, an unknown number flashed on her phone. The voice on the other end was deep, calm, and radiated an authority that needed no introduction. "Ms. Sterling, this is Damien Blackwood. Mr. Vance has shown me your appetizer. It's intriguing. I'm at my penthouse at 15 Central Park West. Be here in 1 hour." The line went dead. An hour later, a private elevator opened directly into an apartment that was less a home and more a private museum, floating above the city. The walls were lined with masterpieces, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there. And standing by a floor-to-ceiling window looking out over Central Park was Damien Blackwood. He was nothing like Julian. Where Julian was all polished, preening charm, Blackwood was stillness and intensity. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes so piercingly intelligent they seemed to see right through her. He was dressed simply in dark trousers and a gray cashmere sweater, but he wore an aura of power more potent than any designer suit. "You claim to have found 3 lost bronzes," he said, his voice quiet but commanding. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I have," Amelia said, matching his directness. She opened her briefcase and laid her complete, meticulously researched report on a massive oak table. The coded correspondence of Giovanni Bardi. It provides triangulation for locations in a Florentine monastery, a private villa in Tuscany, and unbelievably a forgotten storehouse in Valletta, Malta. He spent the next hour reading his silence absolute. Amelia stood, her posture perfect, refusing to fidget or show any sign of nerves. Finally he looked up, his eyes locking with hers. "This is either the most brilliant discovery of the century," he said slowly, "or the most elaborate fraud I've ever seen." "It's not a fraud," she said. He studied her for a long moment. "I'm sending a team to Florence tonight. If the monastery location yields what you say it will, We'll discuss your compensation. If it doesn't, you will never work in the art world or any other world again. Is that clear? Perfectly? Amelia replied, her voice unshakable. He nodded, a flicker of something respect perhaps in his eyes. Tell me, Miss Sterling, he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. How did a woman with your talent end up cataloging dusty letters for pocket money? Amelia met his gaze without flinching. I was in the archives of forgotten things, Mr. Blackwood. It seems I have a talent for finding value where no one else thought to look. The 48 hours that followed were the longest of Amelia's life. She went to her job at the museum, her body on autopilot while her mind was thousands of miles away in a Florentine monastery. She expected Blackwood's men to be discreet, but she knew the art world was a small, gossipy place. If this was real, word would eventually get out. If it was a failure, her humiliation would be absolute. The call came at 4:00 a.m. New York time. It was Damien Blackwood again. The bronze is there, Ms. Sterling, he said, and for the first time Amelia could hear a trace of excitement in his voice. A depiction of David Post's sleigh. It's magnificent. My team is securing it now. Congratulations. Relief washed over Amelia so powerfully her knees went weak. Thank you. I'm in London. My jet will be at Teterboro Airport at 9:00 a.m. to bring you here. We need to plan the acquisition of the other two pieces immediately, and we need to do it before this news breaks. Pack a bag. You won't be going back to your apartment in Queens for a while. Her life changed in the span of a single phone call. The world of Damien Blackwood was one of quiet, limitless efficiency. A black car was waiting for her. The private jet was a Gulfstream G650, its interior more like a luxury hotel suite than an aircraft. When she landed in London, another car whisked her to a magnificent townhouse overlooking Regent's Park. Damien was there along with a team of art historians, security experts, and lawyers, and Amelia was at the center of it all. Damien didn't treat her like an employee. He treated her like a colleague, a fellow strategist. He listened to her insights, deferred to her knowledge of the period, and valued her opinion. For Amelia, who had spent 5 years being told her thoughts were secondary, it was intoxicating. She blossomed under the respect he showed her. Over the next few weeks, they were a whirlwind of activity. They traveled to Tuscany, where under the guise of a historical survey they located the second statue in the cellar of a dilapidated villa. The final piece in Malta was the most difficult, requiring a delicate negotiation with the government, a negotiation Damien handled with masterful diplomacy, crediting Amelia's research as the key to the breakthrough. In that time, a bond formed between them that went beyond their professional collaboration. They shared late-night dinners in Rome, discussing everything from Renaissance politics to their own pasts. Amelia found herself opening up to him in a way she never had with Julian. She told him about her quiet upbringing, her love for history, and eventually about her marriage. She explained it clinically, factually, focusing on the way Julian had tried to erase her passion and her personality. Damien listened, his intense gaze never leaving her face. He wasn't polishing you, he said, when she finished, his voice dangerously soft. He was trying to varnish over something he knew he could never possess. Your mind. He was a fool. He began to see the woman Julian had tried to hide. He saw her brilliance, her resilience, and a deep, quiet strength. The professional respect between them slowly, organically deepened into something more. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a gradual meeting of minds and souls built on a foundation of shared passion and mutual admiration. One evening, after the successful acquisition of the final statue, they stood on the balcony of his suite at the Hotel de Paris in Monaco, looking out at the glittering harbor. The art world was now in an uproar over the Blackwood bronzes, and Amelia Sterling was the mysterious name credited with the discovery. You've given me something priceless, Amelia, Damien said, turning to her. The statues are magnificent, she agreed. I wasn't talking about the statues, he said. He reached out his hand, gently touching her cheek. You've reminded me that true value is rarely on the surface. What do you want, Amelia? As your compensation. Name your price. Amelia thought for a moment. She could ask for a sum of money that would make her independently wealthy for life. But she realized that wasn't what she wanted. What she wanted was to never be powerless again. I don't want a finder's fee, she said, her voice clear and strong. I want a position. I want to be your chief acquisitions advisor and head of provenance for Sterling Global. I want to build a real career on my own terms. A slow smile spread across Damien's face. It transformed his severe features, making him breathtakingly handsome. Done, he said. But I have a counteroffer. He stepped closer, his presence filling her senses. I'd also like to offer you the position of the woman by my side, at dinner tomorrow night, and perhaps the night after that. Amelia's heart soared. I accept, she whispered. Meanwhile, back in New York, the news of the Blackwood bronzes was the talk of the town. Julian Thorne, now a full partner at his firm, read the articles in the Wall Street Journal with a collector's envy. He saw the name Amelia Sterling and felt a brief passing curiosity about the brilliant new art historian who had mesmerized the world's most elusive billionaire. The name meant nothing to him. His ex-wife, the mousy, forgettable Amelia, had long since faded from his memory, presumably living some drab, insignificant life back in Ohio. He had no idea the ghost of his past was about to become the architect of his future. 6 months passed. Amelia was no longer the woman who had shivered on a Manhattan sidewalk. She was Amelia Sterling, a respected and formidable figure in the international art scene. Dressed in bespoke suits and elegant gowns, she moved with an effortless confidence through the auction houses of Sotheby's and Christie's, her opinion capable of adding millions to the value of a painting. Her relationship with Damien had deepened into a profound love. He was her partner in every sense of the word, a man who celebrated her intelligence and championed her ambition. The culmination of her work was to be the unveiling of the 3 Blackwood bronzes at a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was the most anticipated social event of the year. The entire upper echelon of New York society would be there, captains of industry, old money scions, and the new titans of finance, including Julian and Veronica Thorne. Julian's firm had been seeking a partnership with Sterling Global for months. Damien's company was looking to acquire a portfolio of distressed tech assets, and Julian's firm held the key to the deal. It was the transaction that would elevate Julian from a mere partner to a legend at his company. He had been trying for weeks to get a meeting with the reclusive Damien Blackwood, to no avail. The gala was his chance to finally corner the man. Amelia felt a tremor of anxiety as she prepared for the evening. She would be seeing Julian for the first time since he had thrown her out. Are you ready for this? Damien asked, coming up behind her as she stood before the mirror in their penthouse. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. She was wearing a stunning emerald green gown that shimmered under the light, her neck adorned with a simple but breathtaking diamond necklace, a gift from him. I am, she said, her voice more certain than she felt. He's a part of my past, a past you helped me escape. He is, Damien said, his voice hardening slightly. And tonight he will learn that the past is never as far away as we think. They arrived at the Met to a frenzy of flashbulbs. Damien Blackwood's first public appearance with a woman on his arm was major news. They swept through the grand hall, Damien's hand resting possessively on the small of Amelia's back. Julian and his new fiancée, the Boston heiress, were holding court near the entrance to the main exhibition hall. He looked smug and prosperous, the picture of success. His mother, Veronica, stood beside him, her gaze sweeping the room with haughty disapproval. Julian saw Damien Blackwood enter and immediately began to move towards him, a practiced, charming smile fixed on his face. Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. Julian Thorne. I've been... He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had fallen on the woman at Blackwood's side. The smile froze on his face, replaced by a look of utter slack-jawed disbelief. It was Amelia, but it couldn't be. This woman was poised, radiant, exuding a confidence and power that was utterly foreign to him. The mousy girl from Ohio was gone. In her place, was a goddess. Amelia. The name was a choked whisper. Amelia met his gaze, her expression perfectly, coolly neutral. "Hello, Julian," she said, her voice even and calm. Veronica Thorne's face paled, then flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this? What are you doing here?" Before Amelia could reply, Damien spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "She is here with me." He turned his full attention to Julian, his eyes as cold as a winter sea. "So you're Thorne. My head of acquisitions, Ms. Sterling, has been advising me on your firm's proposal." The blood drained from Julian's face. Ms. Sterling. Amelia Sterling, the brilliant art historian, was his ex-wife, the one he had discarded. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The woman whose opinion held the fate of his career-making deal was the same woman he had thrown out in the rain. "Your head of acquisitions?" he stammered, looking from Amelia's calm face to Damien's thunderous one. "Indeed," Damien said smoothly. "Amelia is one of my most trusted advisors. Her eye for value and for forgery is unparalleled. She has concerns about your portfolio. She finds some of your asset valuations to be overly optimistic. Bordering on fraudulent, in fact." Amelia allowed herself a small, icy smile. "You always did have a tendency to overpromise, Julian." The carefully constructed world of Julian Thorne shattered in that moment. Every head in their vicinity had turned. The whispers started spreading through the gala like wildfire. The humiliation was palpable, a thick, choking cloud. He had called her his greatest failed project, and now his entire future depended on her. He looked at her, at the woman he had so carelessly broken, and for the first time he didn't see a project or a possession. He saw a queen, and he realized with a sickening certainty that throwing her away was the single greatest mistake of his entire life. The fallout from the gala was immediate and catastrophic for Julian. The whispers about his connection to the now famous Amelia Sterling, coupled with Damien Blackwood's public dismissal, sent shockwaves through his firm. The Sterling Global deal was dead on arrival. His partners, smelling blood in the water, began to circle. His carefully crafted reputation was in tatters. Desperate, Julian started trying to contact Amelia. He sent flowers which were returned. He sent pleading emails which went unanswered. He even had the audacity to show up at the Sterling Global headquarters only to be politely but firmly removed by security. His desperation culminated in an ambush. He found out which restaurant Amelia and Damien favored for quiet lunches, Le Bernardin, and waited for them. He cornered Amelia as she was leaving, Damien having been held back by a phone call. "Amelia, please, you have to talk to me," he begged, his voice raw. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic pleading tone. "You've ruined me." "I did nothing, Julian," Amelia said, her voice cold. "Your own actions led you here. You built your life on a foundation of lies and cruelty. Sooner or later it was bound to collapse." "It was my mother," he blurted out, his eyes wild. "She was the one who pushed me. She said you weren't good enough, that you were holding me back. I was weak. I listened to her. But I loved you, Leah. I swear I did." Amelia just stared at him, unmoved by the crocodile tears. The man before her was a stranger, a weak, hollow shell. But his mention of his mother sparked something else. A loose thread from the past. Veronica had always been obsessed with bloodlines and legacy. She had once made a cruel comment about Amelia's own family, calling them anonymous Ohio dirt. Amelia's parents had died in a car crash when she was a teenager, and she knew little about her father's side of the family, other than that he had been a painter who had given up his art to support them. That night, driven by a sudden, inexplicable curiosity, Amelia went into the box of belongings she'd taken from the brownstone. At the bottom was a small leather-bound journal of her father's, filled with sketches and notes. She'd never been able to bring herself to read it. The grief was too raw. Now she opened it. The sketches were brilliant, filled with a raw, chaotic energy. But it was the notes that made her stop breathing. He wrote of his youth in New York in the 1970s, of running with the abstract expressionist crowd, of a rivalry with a young upcoming Jean-Michel Basquiat. And he wrote of his real name. He had changed it when he moved to Ohio to escape something. His birth name was Alexander Sterling, the same last name Amelia had instinctively adopted. Her hands shaking, she began a frantic online search. Alexander Sterling was not a famous artist. He was a ghost, a myth, a brilliant painter who had produced a handful of masterpieces in his early 20s and then vanished, completely presumed dead. His few authenticated works were considered priceless, held in the private collections of the world's wealthiest people. Experts had lamented for decades about the lost Sterling legacy. He hadn't vanished. He had run away to Ohio, fallen in love with her mother, and hidden his genius to live a simple life. The journal was the key. It contained sketches of his lost works, details of his techniques and letters that would prove his identity beyond any doubt. And then came the final twist, the one that made the floor drop out from beneath her. In the back of the journal, tucked into a hidden sleeve, was a legal document. It was a deed of trust established by her father's estranged family, a wealthy old New York family who had disowned him for becoming an artist. The trust had been set up to mature on his 60th birthday, or upon confirmation of his death. The assets it contained were staggering: a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, real estate in Manhattan, and the complete untouched collection of all the paintings Alexander Sterling had created before he disappeared. The collection was stored in a private, climate-controlled vault in Geneva. Amelia was not just the daughter of a forgotten painter. She was the sole heir to a fortune that dwarfed Julian's and potentially even rivaled a portion of Damien's. She was the owner of a collection of art that would make her a global powerhouse in her own right. Veronica Thorne hadn't just pushed her son to discard a girl from Ohio. She had unknowingly cast out the heiress to the legendary Sterling legacy, a name far more powerful and respected in the circles she cared about than her own. The irony was so profound it was almost comical. Amelia looked at the documents, then looked at her reflection in the dark window of the penthouse. The journey was complete. She had started with nothing, found power through her own intellect with Damien's help, and now she had discovered a legacy that was hers, and hers alone. She didn't need Damien's wealth or protection. She was his equal in every way. The final confrontation with Julian wouldn't be as Damien Blackwood's bride. It would be as Amelia Sterling, master of her own destiny. The final unraveling of Julian Thorne was not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, grinding erosion. The weeks following the Met Gala were a masterclass in social and financial collapse. The Sterling Global deal, once his crowning achievement, had vaporized, taking with it the confidence of his partners and investors. His name, once a synonym for Midas-like success, was now whispered with a mixture of pity and contempt in the exclusive clubs and restaurants where he had once been king. He was a cautionary tale told over glasses of vintage port. He began selling his assets not out of strategy, but out of sheer bleeding necessity. The Hamptons estate went first, then the collection of rare Richard Mille watches, and finally the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. Each sale was a public stripping of his identity, a dismantling of the facade he had spent his life constructing. His heiress fiancée, seeing the financial storm on the horizon and the social stain of his connection to the ascendant Amelia Sterling, had quietly and unceremoniously returned his ring via a courier. He was left with his cavernous, empty brownstone, a mountain of debt, and a single remaining asset of significant value, a painting he'd acquired at the height of his power, a mid-sized abstract by Willem de Kooning. It was his last claim to the world. He had lost his final bastion of perceived sophistication and wealth. It was this painting that Amelia chose as the stage for their final act. She didn't approach him directly. That would have been too simple, too merciful. Instead, she operated through layers of influence, a ghost pulling strings from a world he could no longer access. She had a trusted associate, A distinguished silver-haired art consultant named Marcus Adler reached out to Sotheby's. Adler, a man Julian had once tried and failed to impress, informed the auction house that his anonymous high-net-worth client had a keen interest in acquiring a de Kooning from that specific period and was willing to bypass the auction process for a private sale provided the piece was right. The bait was set. Sotheby's, eager to broker such a lucrative deal, immediately contacted Julian. To Julian, the inquiry felt like a divine intervention, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. An anonymous European buyer, he was told. The price they were floating was more than enough to silence his most aggressive creditors and give him a chance to start again. He clung to this hope with the desperation of a drowning man. On the day of the viewing, Julian spent an hour he didn't have on his appearance. He wore his last good suit, a Brioni, that now hung slightly loose on his frame, a testament to sleepless nights and a diet of anxiety. He walked into the grand Sotheby's building on York Avenue, forcing a confident stride, nodding at the staff who now looked at him with a polite, clinical distance. He was no longer a major player, he was just a seller, another man parting with his treasures. He was escorted to a private viewing room on the upper floor. These rooms were designed for discretion and comfort with soft gray walls, hushed lighting, and expensive leather chairs. On a single starkly lit easel in the center of the room stood his de Kooning, its chaotic beauty a stark contrast to the sterile environment. He waited, his heart hammering against his ribs, rehearsing his pitch, his story of the painting's provenance. The door opened. Julian turned, his most charming professional smile already forming on his lips, and then it froze, cracking like thin ice. It was Amelia. She stood there alone, a vision of calm, collected power in a simple, impeccably tailored black dress. She looked not at him, but at the painting, her expression one of intense professional scrutiny. For a full 10 seconds she said nothing, letting the silence stretch and thicken with his shock. His mind raced, cycling through a dozen impossible scenarios. Was she here to gloat, to torment him? Or his desperate heart foolishly wondered, was she here to save him? To buy his painting as an act of pity? A final, merciful gesture, Amelia. He finally managed, his voice a dry rasp. What is this? What are you doing here? Due diligence, she said, her voice cool and even as she finally turned her gaze from the painting to him. I'm the potential buyer. Or rather, I was. The last flicker of hope in Julian's chest died instantly, replaced by a cold dread. This was not a rescue. This was a reckoning. You, he stammered the word, catching in his throat. How could you possibly? I have my own resources now, Julian, she said, cutting through his disbelief. She took a step towards the painting, running a finger near the edge of the canvas without touching it. I always thought there was something wrong with this piece, even when it was hanging in our dining room. The brushwork in the lower left quadrant. It's too controlled. The impasto is hesitant. It bothered me, but of course my opinion didn't matter back then, did it? It was just another of my quaint little hobbies. She walked over to a sleek mahogany table and picked up a thick leather-bound folder. She opened it, revealing dozens of pages of graphs, microscopic images, and dense technical reports. I had it analyzed before I agreed to this meeting. X-ray fluorescence pigment analysis, infrared reflectography. The titanium white pigment used in the base layer contains rutile, which de Kooning didn't start using consistently until 3 years after this piece was supposedly created. The signature is flawless to the naked eye, but under magnification you can see the microscopic tremors of a forger, not the fluid confidence of a master. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and sharp, devoid of any emotion but a clinical certainty. It's a masterful forgery, Julian, a brilliant fake. It's aesthetically pleasing, but financially and historically it's worthless. She let the file fall shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. It's just like the life you built. And it's just like the portfolio of inflated assets you tried to sell to Sterling Global. The blood drained from Julian's face. The painting wasn't just his last financial hope. It was his last connection to his former glory, a symbol of his supposed taste and acumen. To learn it was a fake, a lie, was to be told his entire judgment, his entire identity was fraudulent. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in denial. "That's impossible. It was vetted by the best." "The best can be fooled," Amelia countered, her voice relentless. "Especially when the buyer wants so badly to believe in the fantasy." She took a step closer to him, and for the first time he could see the fire in her eyes. This wasn't just about a painting. This was about 5 years of his life he had stolen from her. "That's what you do, isn't it, Julian? You sell fantasies. You sold one to your partners, your clients, and you sold one to me. The fantasy that you were a man of substance. The fantasy that our marriage was a partnership. But it was all a forgery." He finally broke. The carefully constructed dam of his pride crumbled, and a wave of pathetic desperation poured out. "Please, Leah," he begged, using the old pet name, a violation that made her flinch. "Don't do this. You've won. You have everything. Blackwood, the money, the fame. You've ruined me. Isn't that enough?" "This isn't about revenge," she said, her voice dropping to an intense, quiet register. "This is about truth. Something you've never understood. You think my life is about Damien. You think my power is borrowed from him. That's the same mistake you made 5 years ago. You thought you could give me value, and therefore you thought you could take it away." He saw an opening, a chance to appeal to the woman he thought he knew. "I loved you," he said, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "I did. I was a fool, pressured by my mother, by my ambitions. But what we had was real." Amelia laughed. It wasn't a sound of humor, but of pure, crystalline irony. "What we had was a lie, Julian. And you want to talk about your mother? Let's talk about her. Let's talk about legacy and bloodlines, the things she valued above all else." She walked over to a discreet panel on the wall and pressed a button. A large screen descended silently from the ceiling. With a tap on her phone, an image appeared on the screen. It was a painting, a work of breathtaking power and beauty, an abstract explosion of color, rage, and life that made the fake de Kooning on the easel look like a child's drawing. Julian stared at it, confused. "What is this?" "This," Amelia said, her voice ringing with a pride and power he had never heard before, "is the Phoenix #1, the first in a series of lost masterpieces. My father's work." She swiped on her phone, and the image was replaced by a digital version of a catalog. On the cover was the same painting, and beneath it the text, "Alexander Sterling, The Lost Collection, an exhibition curated by Amelia Sterling." Julian read the name, his mind struggling to connect the dots. "Sterling? That's your name now." "It was always my name," she declared, her voice resonating with the weight of generations. "It was my father's birth name. He changed it when he left New York to escape the art world, to escape a family that didn't understand him. He was a myth, a ghost who experts thought had died in the 80s. But he didn't. He fell in love, moved to Ohio, and raised a daughter." She brought up another slide, a financial valuation report from a Swiss bank. The numbers so large they seemed unreal. "Your mother was so obsessed with my background, with my anonymous family. She pushed you to discard me for a woman with a proper lineage." "Well, Julian, my father's name, the Sterling name, carries a legacy in this city, in the world she so desperately wants to impress, that makes the Thorne name look like a footnote. I am the sole heir to his entire collection, to his estate, a fortune that makes your life's work look like a rounding error." The full catastrophic truth finally crashed down on Julian Thorne. The scale of his mistake was so immense, so cosmically stupid, that it defied comprehension. He had stood on a mountain of diamonds and complained he didn't have a view. He had held the winning lottery ticket in his hand and thrown it into the fire because he didn't like the color of the paper. He had thrown away a woman he deemed worthless, only to discover she was in every conceivable way priceless. He sank into one of the leather chairs, his body unable to support the weight of his failure. He looked at Amelia, truly looked at her for the first time not as a possession or a project, but as the formidable self-possessed woman she was, and he felt a sense of loss so profound it was a physical ache in his chest. Amelia delivered the final devastating blow, her voice devoid of hatred, speaking only a simple, hard truth. You once stood in our doorway and called me your greatest failed project. You were wrong. You were never my creator. You were my cage. Escaping you, rediscovering myself, finding my own legacy, that was my greatest project. And it has been an unqualified success. She turned and walked towards the door, her posture erect, her step sure and steady. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. There was nothing left in that room for her but ghosts and a worthless painting. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the city. Damien was waiting for her, leaning against his car, not with an ounce of impatience, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knew her worth. He searched her face and saw not the strain of battle, but the serene calm of a war finally won. He simply opened the car door for her. As she slid into the seat, he got in beside her. "Where to, Ms. Sterling?" he asked, his voice filled with a deep well of love and respect. Amelia looked out the window at the city that had once cast her out. It was her city now. She was no longer just the billionaire's bride. She was the Sterling legacy. She was a founder, a curator, a force in her own right. And she was a woman in love with a man who saw all of it and cherished her for it. "Let's go home," she said, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time that day. "We have an exhibition to plan." Amelia Sterling's story isn't just about marrying a billionaire. It's a powerful testament to the fact that our true value is never determined by who we are with, but by who we are. It's about rediscovering the passion and strength that lies dormant within us, waiting for the chance to ignite. Julian saw her as a reflection of his own ambition, but Damien, and more importantly Amelia herself, saw her for the brilliant, resilient woman she always was. Her journey from a rain-slicked sidewalk left with nothing to the pinnacle of the art world shows us that the most spectacular comebacks are not funded by money, but forged in the fires of our own self-worth and determination. If Amelia's journey from heartbreak to triumph resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of second chances, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know. Share this story with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story of resilience and redemption. Thank you for listening.
It wasn't the cascade of diamonds at her throat that silenced the room, nor the designer gown that clung to her like a second skin. It was the look in her eyes. Standing on the precipice of public humiliation, Rebecca Hamilton watched her billionaire husband, Mason, guide his young mistress across the ballroom floor. Anyone else might have shattered. But Rebecca wasn't just a wife. She was an architect. And as he spun another woman in the spotlight he'd stolen from her, she made a decision. She wouldn't just expose their affair. She would detonate the very foundation of his empire. This wasn't a story of heartbreak. It was the story of a queen taking back her kingdom, armed with nothing but a microphone and a truth more devastating than any affair. The grand ballroom of the Atoria Hotel was suffocating in its own opulence. A galaxy of crystal chandeliers rained down cold, fractured light upon New York's elite. The air was thick with competing scents of expensive perfume and the faint metallic tang of ambition. This was the annual Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, an event Mason Hamilton, founder and CEO of Hamilton Innovations, chaired with the proprietary air of a man who didn't just attend charity events, but owned the very concept of charity itself. From her seat at the head table, Rebecca Hamilton watched him work the room. To the uninitiated, Mason was a titan of modern industry, a charismatic visionary who had revolutionized data security. His smile, a dazzling flash of white, was his primary weapon. It disarmed senators, charmed investors, and for a time had convinced Rebecca that the man she'd married was the same man the world adored. Now she saw the mechanics behind it, the slight upward tilt of the chin for condescension, the crinkle at the eyes for feigned sincerity, the way it never, ever truly reached his own. She smoothed a non-existent crease in the shimmering gunmetal gray silk of her gown. Her dress was a statement, elegant, severe, and impenetrable. It was a suit of armor for a battle she hadn't known she was fighting until it was almost too late. For the past year, the distance between them had grown from a crack to a chasm. It started with late nights at the office, hushed phone calls he'd walk into another room to take, and a new, almost manic obsession with his public image. He had always been vain, but this was different. It was defensive. Rebecca had been more than a silent partner in his ascent. In the early days, in their cramped Palo Alto apartment, it was her code that formed the bedrock of Hamilton Innovation's first patent. It was her quiet, meticulous business plan that had secured their first round of funding when Mason's blustering charm had failed. She was the architect. He was the gilded facade. But as the billions rolled in, her name had been gently, systematically erased from the company's history, relegated to the role of supportive wife. He had rewritten their shared story, and she lost in the whirlwind of their success, and the birth of their son had allowed it to happen. "He's in his element, isn't he?" a voice purred beside her. It was Beatrice Vance, a formidable woman whose husband ran a rival hedge fund. Her eyes, however, weren't on Mason. They were fixed on a younger woman holding court near the silent auction table. "That's your husband's new senior analyst, isn't it, Olivia Reeves?" "No relation." "Thank God." Rebecca's gaze followed. Olivia Reeves. Of course, she was everything. Rebecca was not effervescent, overtly ambitious. With a hungry look she mistook for passion. She wore a crimson dress that was a slash of defiance in the sea of muted, tasteful colors. Rebecca had seen her before in passing at company events, a bright young thing from Wharton whom Mason had personally mentored, fast-tracking her to a position of influence that made no logistical sense. Rebecca had ignored the signs, burying her suspicions under the weight of a 20-year marriage and the hope that she was simply being paranoid. But the whispers had become too loud, the evidence too stark, the private credit card statements she wasn't supposed to see detailing trips to St. Bart's that coincided with Olivia's Instagram posts, the lingering scent of a floral perfume, jasmine, and something sharp in Mason's car. "She certainly made an impression," Rebecca replied, her voice a placid lake over a churning abyss. "She's made something, dear," Beatrice muttered, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. Mason was laughing now, a deep, booming sound that commanded attention. He had his hand on the small of Olivia's back. It was a gesture of ownership, casual and confident, performed for an audience he believed was too dazzled by his brilliance to see the betrayal. But Rebecca saw it, and in that moment, she felt the last vestiges of her denial crumble into dust. The pain was a physical thing, a shard of ice in her chest. But beneath the pain, something else was crystallizing, a cold, hard resolve. She had tolerated the sidelining, the erasure of her contributions, the slow, painful death of their partnership. She had convinced herself it was the price of the life they had built, the price of stability for their son, Tyler, who was safely away at boarding school, shielded from this toxic charade. But this public spectacle of humiliation was a line he had not just crossed, but danced upon. Mason finally returned to the table, his face flushed with adoration, not for her, but from the sycophants he'd just left. "Rebecca, darling, you're looking tense. Have a drink. Enjoy the evening we've put together." He gestured expansively, as if he had personally hung the chandeliers. "I am enjoying it, Mason," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "I'm finding it all very illuminating." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He searched her face, looking for the familiar acquiescence, the gentle deference he had come to expect. He found none. He saw only a stranger, a woman with eyes like polished steel. "Good," he said, turning away, already scanning the crowd for his next admirer. "The auction for the pediatric wing is about to begin. My speech is after. I'll expect you to be smiling." It wasn't a request. It was an order. One last order she would pretend to obey. As the lights dimmed and the auctioneer took the stage, Rebecca discreetly slid her hand into her evening bag. She didn't touch the spare lipstick or the compact mirror. Her fingers closed around a small, sleek USB drive. It contained a different kind of truth. Not just the truth of his infidelity, but the truth of his success. The truth of a project codenamed Chimera. She had stumbled upon it by accident, looking for an old tax document on their home server. A mislabeled folder, a password that was with grim irony her own birthday. It was a labyrinth of deception. Shell corporations, falsified data reports submitted to investors, backdoors built into the security software they sold to Fortune 500 companies, software she had helped design. He had taken her brilliant, protective code and twisted it into a skeleton key, selling security on one hand, while creating vulnerabilities he could exploit on the other. And the architect of this fraudulent data scheme, the one who managed the flow of information and cooked the books, the project lead was listed as O. Reeves. Olivia, it all clicked into place. The affair wasn't just a sordid dalliance. It was a business partnership. Olivia wasn't just a mistress. She was an accomplice. Mason hadn't just betrayed his marriage. He had betrayed every client, every investor, and the very principles upon which their empire was supposedly built. The auctioneer's voice droned on, listing off seven-figure bids for luxury vacations and priceless art. Rebecca felt strangely detached, as if she were watching a film of her own life. She saw the path ahead with terrifying clarity. She could remain silent, keep her gilded cage, and let the poison spread, or she could burn it all to the ground. Mason patted her hand, a perfunctory, possessive gesture. "Get ready to be proud of me, darling." "Oh, Mason," she said, looking him directly in the eye, a faint, chilling smile touching her lips. "I have no doubt that tonight will be a night you'll never forget." The final bid for a week on Richard Branson's private island closed at a staggering $2 million, drawing a wave of performative applause. The auctioneer, a man with a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, beamed at the crowd. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce the man whose vision and generosity make nights like this possible, the chairman of the Starlight Children's Foundation, the titan of technology. Please welcome Mr. Mason Hamilton." A spotlight found Mason as he rose from his chair. He buttoned his tuxedo jacket, basking in the adulation. He gave Rebecca's shoulder a final proprietary squeeze. "Here we go," he whispered, his breath smelling of champagne and self-satisfaction. He strode toward the stage, his gait filled with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed he was the master of his own universe. Rebecca watched him go, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This was the moment, the point of no return. Mason's speech was exactly what she expected, a masterful tapestry of feigned humility and carefully crafted sound bites. He spoke of hope, of legacy, of the profound responsibility that came with great wealth. He painted a picture of himself as a benevolent king, bestowing his blessings upon the less fortunate. The crowd was captivated, hanging on every word. "We are not just building a company," he declared, his voice resonating with rehearsed passion. "We are building a better future, a more secure future for our children." Rebecca almost laughed at the irony. A secure future built on a foundation of lies. Then came the part she knew was coming, the part that was for an audience of one Olivia. And of course, none of this is possible without inspiration. Mason continued, letting his gaze drift from the teleprompter. He scanned the crowd and, with the subtlety of a freight train, his eyes landed on the slash of crimson in the third row. He smiled a private, intimate smile that was horrifyingly public. "To the fire that fuels the engine, to the spark of brilliance that challenges us to be better." The room was silent, but 1,000 unspoken messages crackled in the air. People shifted in their seats. Glances were exchanged. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Rebecca felt the stares of 100 people, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was no longer Rebecca Hamilton, a woman of substance and intellect. She was the wife, a tragic figure in a drama not of her own making. The humiliation was a physical force pressing down on her, trying to crush her. She could feel her composure threatening to crack. The sting of tears pricked at the back of her eyes. She could flee. She could run to the powder room and collapse in a heap of gray silk and shattered dignity. That was what everyone expected. That was what he expected. But as she looked at Mason preening on stage, and at Olivia, who was now looking down with a demure yet triumphant smile, the grief inside her flash froze into something harder, something more potent rage, a pure, clarifying rage that burned away the pain and left only purpose. He was not just disrespecting her. He was using this stage, this noble cause, as a backdrop for his sordid little power play. He was desecrating the memory of the company they had built together, the dreams they had once shared. Mason finished his speech to thunderous applause and a standing ovation. As the lights came up slightly, a live orchestra began to play a soft, romantic ballad. It was the signal for the ceremonial first dance. Traditionally, the chairman and his wife would take the floor. Mason descended the stage. His face aglow, he walked right past Rebecca. The room held his collective breath. With a confidence that was breathtaking in its audacity, he extended his hand not to his wife of 20 years, but to the woman in the crimson dress, to Olivia Reeves. Olivia looked momentarily surprised, a flicker of what might have been genuine shock or expertly feigned modesty. She glanced at Rebecca, a silent, insolent question in her eyes. Then she placed her hand in Mason's. The gasps were audible now, sharp intakes of breath rippling through the ballroom. Beatrice Vance, sitting beside Rebecca, reached out and placed a hand on her arm. "That man," she hissed, "has no soul." Rebecca didn't flinch. She watched them walk to the center of the vast, polished dance floor. The orchestra, after a moment of confused hesitation, swelled into the melody of a classic waltz. Mason placed one hand on Olivia's waist, the other engulfing her hand, and began to move. They were a striking couple, his commanding presence, her youthful fire. They moved with a practiced ease that spoke of hours spent together away from prying eyes. Now they were broadcasting their intimacy, turning the dance floor into their own private island, inviting 1,000 people to witness Rebecca's ultimate disgrace. Every turn, every dip, every shared smile was a fresh cut. He was erasing her, publicly replacing her, declaring her obsolete. The pitying stares intensified, but Rebecca no longer felt them. She was insulated by her newfound purpose. She was no longer watching a betrayal. She was watching a target position himself perfectly in her sights. She rose from her chair. Her movement was so deliberate, so calm that it commanded more attention than a hysterical outburst ever could. Beatrice's hand fell away. A hush began to spread from their table outwards as people noticed the scorned wife was now on her feet. She did not look at the dancing couple. Her eyes were fixed on the stage, which the MC was now approaching to thank Mason for his speech. Rebecca's path was clear. With a straight back and a steady, measured pace, she began to walk. She walked past tables of stunned onlookers, her gunmetal gray dress a whisper of steel moving through the gilded chaos. Mason, lost in his triumph and Olivia's adoring gaze, hadn't noticed. He spun his mistress in a final, dramatic flourish as the song came to its end, her red dress flaring around them like a flame. By the time he looked up, basking in the awkward, scattered applause, it was too late. Rebecca had already reached the side of the stage. The MC, a local news anchor named Michael Shaw, saw her approaching, his professional smile faltering into confusion. "Mrs. Hamilton," he asked, his voice low, "is everything all right?" Rebecca didn't answer him. Her eyes were locked on the lectern in the center of the stage. The microphone was still live. She ascended the 3 short steps. The spotlight, which had been fading, suddenly found her. The room fell into a deep, profound silence. On the dance floor, Mason froze. The smug, triumphant look on his face evaporated, replaced by dawning horror. He saw his wife standing on his stage, in his spotlight, and for the first time that evening, Mason Hamilton looked afraid. Rebecca stepped up to the lectern, her gloved hands gripping its sides. She leaned toward the microphone, her heart hammering against her ribs, a wild, terrifying drumbeat of liberation. She took a breath and looked out, not at the crowd, but directly at her husband. The silence in the Atoria Grand Ballroom was a living entity. It was absolute, heavier than the crystal chandeliers, deeper than the pockets of the men and women who now stared, utterly transfixed, at the woman on the stage. The orchestra had trailed off into a confused discordance before falling quiet. Wait, staff froze mid-stride. Trays of champagne glasses held aloft like offerings to a new, unpredictable deity. Rebecca Hamilton stood in the lone spotlight, a figure carved from ice and will. She didn't weep. She didn't scream. Her poise was more unsettling than any display of hysteria could ever be. Her gaze remained locked on Mason, who was still standing in the middle of the dance floor, Olivia a scarlet shadow at his side. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, the ghost of a woman he thought he had successfully buried. "Good evening," Rebecca said. Her voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, was crisp and clear. It cut through the silence like a scalpel. There was no tremor, no hint of tears. It was the voice she used in boardrooms, the voice of calm, irrefutable authority he hadn't heard in years. "I apologize for the interruption." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air, dripping with an irony so thick it was almost tangible. "But my husband, in his wonderful speech, spoke of inspiration, of legacy, and it moved me. It moved me to share a more complete version of the story." A nervous murmur rippled through the audience. This was no longer just a marital spat. It was becoming a public execution. Marcus Thorne, a veteran reporter for the New York Times who was seated near the front, had already discreetly activated the voice recorder on his phone. Rebecca's eyes scanned the room, acknowledging the powerful faces staring back at her. "Many of you in this room are investors in Hamilton Innovations. You are partners. You have entrusted my husband with your capital, your confidence, and your own corporate security. You believe in the story of a brilliant man who built an impregnable fortress to protect the world's data." She let her gaze drift back to Mason. "It is a wonderful story, and like all the best stories, it is a magnificent fiction." A collective gasp went through the room. Mason took a step forward, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Rebecca, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Get off that stage." His voice was a harsh whisper, but in the unnerving quiet it carried, Rebecca ignored him, her focus absolute. "Mason is right about one thing. He didn't do it alone. In the beginning, we were partners. While he was the face, the voice, the dazzling salesman, I was the architect. I wrote the foundational code for our Sentinel security suite, my algorithm, my design, a design based on a simple, sacred principle, inviolability." She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience in. "A fortress has walls to keep people out, but the most effective fortress, the most profitable one, has a secret door that only the king can open. For years, I believed we were building walls. I was wrong. My husband and his protege have been building doors." The spotlight felt hot on her skin, but inside she was ice cold. She saw Olivia's face now, the color draining from it, the triumphant smirk replaced by dawning, panicked comprehension. "I believe the board members from Sterling Cooper Capital are here tonight," Rebecca asked, her tone deceptively pleasant. She scanned the front tables. A few men in bespoke suits shifted uncomfortably, and the representatives from the Vidian Group, your companies, along with 24 other Fortune 500 firms, are flagship clients of our Sentinel-class security. She didn't need to wait for a reply. "I'm sure you'll be fascinated to learn, then, about Project Chimera." The name landed like a stone in a still pond. There was no recognition from the audience, but on the dance floor, Mason flinched as if he'd been struck. Olivia took an involuntary step back, her eyes wide with terror. Project Chimera, Rebecca continued, her voice resonating with cold, hard clarity, is the unofficial, highly confidential, and wildly illegal R&D initiative at the heart of Hamilton Innovation's recent profit boom. It's a simple, elegant piece of fraud. While we sell you impenetrable security, Project Chimera actively develops and maintains a series of master backdoors in that very software. We sell the lock, and we sell the skeleton key. The room erupted. The low murmur exploded into a roar of shock and outrage. The scene devolved into chaos. Phones were not just out, they were held high, recording. Marcus Thorne was already on his feet, moving toward the stage. Mason finally broke from his paralysis. Lies. She's hysterical. Security, he bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. He started moving toward the stage, pushing through the throng of onlookers. My wife is unwell. She's having a breakdown. Am I? Rebecca's voice sliced through the din, regaining control. She held up her left hand, and in it, the small USB drive she had taken from her purse. It glinted under the spotlight. This is not hysteria. This is data. This is a complete internal audit of Project Chimera. Code names, timelines, encrypted communications. It contains the schematics of the backdoors, a list of every client who has been compromised, and most importantly, the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands where the profits from this special access have been diverted. She looked directly at Olivia, whose face was now a ghastly shade of white against her crimson dress. It also includes every single progress report and financial transfer authorized by the project's lead analyst, a very bright, very ambitious young woman named Olivia Reeves. The match had been struck. The inferno was about to begin. The revelation of Olivia's name was the spark that ignited the powder keg. The chaos in the ballroom instantly stratified. The merely curious backed away, creating a ring of horrified spectators. The personally invested, the board members, the investors, the high-powered clients surged forward, their faces contorted with rage and disbelief. Shouts of, "What is she talking about, and is this true?" echoed off the frescoed ceiling. Olivia Reeves looked as though the floor had vanished from beneath her feet. Her carefully constructed world of ambition, seduction, and power had been vaporized in a single, perfectly enunciated sentence. She looked from Rebecca's cold, implacable face on the stage to Mason's approaching storm of fury, and her composure shattered. She was no longer a brilliant analyst or a coveted mistress. She was a cornered animal. "He made me," she stammered, the words barely audible, directed at no one and everyone. "He told me it was a contingency, a security stress test." Mason finally reached the foot of the stage, his handsome face purple with rage. Two burly security guards in ill-fitting tuxedos were close behind him. "Shut her up," he roared at them, pointing a trembling finger at his wife. "Get that microphone away from her now." But the guards hesitated, caught between the fury of their billionaire benefactor and the surreal, high-stakes drama unfolding before them. They were security for a charity gala, prepared for drunkards and gatecrashers, not for the live broadcast implosion of a corporate empire. Rebecca held her ground, the USB drive held up like a talisman. "Ask him about the Axiom Holdings account number 7345B at the Grand Cayman National Bank." She projected her voice, overriding the rising tide of noise. "An account opened 6 months ago, an account that received 3 separate 7-figure wire transfers from a shell corporation based in Panama. A shell corporation whose sole purpose is to sell proprietary client data, your data, to the highest bidder on the dark web." A man in the front, a portly executive Rebecca recognized as Robert Mayfield, CEO of a major logistics firm, turned on Mason. "My God, Mason, we just signed a 9-figure security contract with you last month. Is what she's saying true? It's slander. It's corporate espionage." Mason yelled, finally scrambling up the side of the stage himself, his elegant tuxedo now disheveled. He lunged for the lectern, for the microphone, for his wife. Rebecca stepped back calmly, pulling the microphone from its stand with a practiced movement. She never took her eyes off him. He will tell you I'm vindictive. He will tell you I'm a scorned woman seeking revenge for his infidelity. She gestured with her free hand toward the dance floor where Olivia stood, weeping openly now. And he is not wrong. I am a scorned woman. He made sure of that tonight. But my hurt is irrelevant. This she held up the USB drive again, is not about my marriage. It's about his fraud. The security guards, spurred into action by Mason's physical presence on the stage, finally moved toward her. But it was too late. The damage was done. Every phone in the room was a weapon aimed at Mason Hamilton. Marcus Thorne of the Times was already dictating furiously to his editor. That's PROJECDCHIMERA. Yes, it's the wife on stage. Get a team ready. Mason reached Rebecca, his hand grabbing her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. You're destroying us, he hissed, his charismatic mask completely gone, revealing the snarling, desperate man beneath. You're destroying everything. No, Mason, Rebecca said, her voice dropping to a near whisper meant only for him, though the microphone still carried it to the silent, watching room. You destroyed us. You destroyed it all the moment you decided your genius was a license to steal. I'm just turning on the lights. She wrenched her arm from his grasp with a strength that surprised them both. At that moment, the hotel security, finally realizing the situation was far beyond the capabilities of the event staff, arrived in force. They were professional, organized, and moved with purpose, creating a cordon around the stage. Mason, seeing the new uniforms, seeing the professional calm in their eyes, seemed to shrink. The fight went out of him, replaced by the cold, stark terror of a man who had just lost complete control. He looked out at the sea of faces, former friends, former allies, former admirers, and saw only condemnation. He saw his legacy turning to ash. Down on the floor, the scene was one of utter pandemonium. Olivia Reeves, seeing the professional security and hearing the shouts for the SEC and federal investigators, made a desperate move. She turned and fled, pushing past stunned guests, her crimson dress a blur. She ran for the exit, sobbing a high-pitched, panicked sound. She didn't get far. Two of the hotel security men intercepted her before she could reach the lobby, holding her gently but firmly by the arms. Her flight was an admission of guilt, more damning than any document. On stage, Rebecca stood poised and still amidst the wreckage she had wrought. She looked at the man she had loved, the man with whom she had built a life and an empire, and felt a profound, aching emptiness. There was no triumph, no joy, only the grim satisfaction of a necessary, painful amputation. She walked calmly over to the edge of the stage toward Marcus Thorne, who was now being held back by a security guard. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice steady. The reporter's eyes were wide with professional glee and genuine shock. Mrs. Hamilton, she held out the USB drive. I believe this belongs in the hands of someone who will know what to do with it. I have already sent a password-protected copy to the Enforcement Division of the SEC and to my attorney. The password will be released in 1 hour. This is your head start. Thorne's hand shot out, taking the small piece of plastic and metal as if it were the Holy Grail. Mrs. Hamilton, why? He asked, the journalist in him unable to resist the question. Rebecca looked back at Mason, who was now being quietly but firmly escorted off the other side of the stage, his face slack with shock. Because, she said, the microphone catching her final, devastating words before a guard finally cut the power. Some of us still believe that a fortress should protect the people inside, not just the king on his throne. The spotlight died. The ballroom was plunged into a babble of frantic conversation and the harsh, functional light of the hotel's main fixtures. The party was over. The inferno had just begun. The Architect's Revenge. Rebecca Hamilton's story. The hours that followed were a blur of structured chaos. The Starlight Children's Foundation Gala did not so much end as it was quarantined, becoming the epicenter of a story that was already exploding across the globe. The Atoria Hotel, in cooperation with the NYPD, who had arrived with quiet, grim efficiency, locked the ballroom down. No one was allowed to leave without giving a preliminary statement. Rebecca was escorted not to a police car, but to a private suite on one of the upper floors. Her attorney, Benjamin Carter, having been summoned and arriving with the speed of a man who knew his billing hour for this night would become legendary. He was a small, precise man with eyes that missed nothing. He found Rebecca standing by the vast window, looking down at the river of red and blue lights flashing silently on the street below. Her armor, the gunmetal gray dress, now felt impossibly heavy. "The SEC has already been in touch," Ben said, his voice calm and grounding. "They received your package. They have the password. An emergency injunction is being filed to freeze all Hamilton Innovations assets, personal and corporate. Mason and Misbah Reeves are being held for questioning in separate locations. It's moving fast. Rebecca, faster than I've ever seen." "Good," she said, her voice distant. She hadn't asked about her son, Tyler. He was safe at his school, hundreds of miles away. But she knew this tidal wave would reach him eventually. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, a cost she had calculated but still dreaded paying. Marcus Thorne's initial online report broke the internet an hour ago. Ben continued, looking at his phone. "The Hamilton papers. He's calling it. The stock is already in free fall in after-hours trading. It will be worthless by morning. You didn't just expose a fraud. Rebecca, you decapitated a multinational corporation." She turned from the window. "It was a cancer. I removed it and the patient is dead. Thousands of employees, pension funds, an entire ecosystem." Ben countered softly. "We'll be better off once the rot is gone," she finished, her voice hardening again. Those employees were working for a criminal enterprise. Their pensions were invested in a lie. The truth is always brutal. "Ben, that doesn't make it wrong." He saw the unshakable conviction in her eyes and nodded slowly. "The district attorney's office will want to offer you immunity in exchange for your full testimony." "I don't need immunity," she replied. "I haven't broken any laws." "Rebecca," he said, his tone sharpening with professional concern, "you were on the board. You were a co-founder. They will argue your silence was complicity." This was the part she had prepared for, the move in the chess game she knew was coming. "I have my own documentation, my logs, my own internal audits from the moment I suspected something was wrong. Voicemails I saved, emails I flagged. I have a clear, documented timeline of my own discovery, my internal objections to Mason, which were dismissed, and my decision to act once I had irrefutable proof. I am not an accomplice. I am the key witness." Ben stared at her, a slow smile of pure admiration spreading across his face. "You magnificent woman, you didn't just bring a bomb to the party. You built the fallout shelter first." For the first time that night, a flicker of something other than ice and pain touched Rebecca's lips. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. A good architect always plans for demolition. Downstairs, the gilded cage had become an interrogation room. Mason Hamilton, stripped of his charm and his power, sat in a hotel conference room that now served as a makeshift command post. His bravado had evaporated, replaced by a sullen, petulant silence. He demanded his own lawyer, refusing to answer any questions. He kept looking at the door as if expecting someone to walk in and tell him this was all a terrible misunderstanding. No one came. In another room, Olivia Reeves had crumbled completely. Her confession, interspersed with hysterical sobs, tumbled out. She painted herself as a victim, a brilliant young woman seduced and manipulated by a powerful man. She claimed she thought Project Chimera was a theoretical exercise, that she didn't understand the true implications until it was too late. But the digital trail Rebecca had provided was absolute. Olivia's digital signature was on every fraudulent report, every illegal transfer. She was not a pawn. She was the project manager. Her desperation was not that of an innocent, but of a co-conspirator who had been outplayed. As the sun began to rise over the city, casting long gray shadows across the deserted ballroom, Rebecca knew her old life was over. The homes, the jets, the status, all of it was gone, incinerated in the fire she had started. The name Hamilton, once a symbol of innovation and success, would now be synonymous with disgrace. Ben finally closed his briefcase. "They're ready for you to give your formal statement. After that, I'm taking you to a secure location. The press is already camped outside your townhouse. It's going to be a storm." Rebecca nodded. She felt strangely calm. The weight of her secret, of her husband's betrayal, had been lifted. In its place was a vast, uncertain future. She had lost her past and torched her present, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt free. As they walked toward the door, Ben paused. "Are you ready for this?" Rebecca looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the hotel window. The exhausted woman in the impossibly expensive dress looked back at her. The queen was in ruins. Her castle was gone, but she was still the queen. "I've been ready for a long time," she said. "Let's begin." She had walked into the gala as a billionaire's wife. She was walking out as the architect of his downfall, the guardian of a truth he had tried to bury, and the master of her own uncertain fate. The dance was over, but her new life was just beginning. The news cycle was merciless. By mid-morning, Hamilton Innovation's collapse was trending worldwide. Every major financial channel had assembled panels of experts to dissect the implosion of what had, 12 hours earlier, been the gold standard of cybersecurity. The stock, which had closed the previous day at $287 per share, was now trading at pennies. Trading had been halted 3 times before the market simply gave up trying to staunch the bleeding. The employees of Hamilton Innovations arrived at their sleek headquarters to find FBI agents at the doors. The building was sealed, declared a crime scene. Thousands of workers stood in shocked clusters on the plaza. Their carefully curated careers suddenly turned to vapor. Mid-level executives who had been boarding red-eye flights to satellite offices were intercepted at airports. The company credit cards in their wallets had already been deactivated. In a conference room on the 87th floor of an anonymous glass tower, 30 blocks from the chaos, Rebecca sat with Ben Carter and a team of 6 federal prosecutors. The table was littered with coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches. They had been there for 4 hours, and they were still just scratching the surface. "Let me get this straight," said the lead prosecutor, a stern woman named Patricia Winters. "You're saying that the back doors weren't just for industrial espionage. They were selling access to foreign entities." Rebecca nodded, sliding a printed sheet across the table. "This is a transaction log from last quarter. The client, codenamed Asclepius, paid $8 million for a direct portal into Mayfield Logistics shipping manifests. Mayfield handles 70% of military equipment transport for the Eastern Seaboard." Winter's face hardened. "This isn't just securities fraud anymore. This is a national security breach." "That's why I came forward," Rebecca said simply. "I couldn't be complicit in this, not once I understood the full scope." "When did you first suspect?" asked a younger prosecutor, his tie already loosened at 10 in the morning. Rebecca took a breath. This was the question she had been preparing for, the one that could determine whether she was seen as a whistleblower or an accessory. 8 months ago, I noticed anomalies in our quarterly reports. The revenue projections were outpacing our client acquisition rate by a significant margin. When I asked Mason about it, he told me we had implemented a new premium tier service for select clients. It seemed plausible at the time. She paused, remembering the moment in their living room, how easily the lie had slipped from his lips, how easily she had accepted it. Then 3 months ago, I was searching for some old tax documents on our home server when I found a mislabeled folder. It was password protected, but the password was my birthday. She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Inside were partial records of Project Chimera. Not enough to understand the full scope, but enough to raise serious questions. "And you confronted him?" Winters asked. "I tried. He dismissed my concerns, told me it was part of a classified government contract, that I didn't have the clearance to know more. I pretended to accept that explanation while I dug deeper. One of the prosecutors shuffled through his notes. Yet you remained on the board during this time. You signed off on quarterly statements. Ben Carter sat forward, his posture changing from observer to defender in an instant. My client specifically appended a note to her signatures requesting additional verification of certain revenue streams. It's all documented. Rebecca placed a hand on Ben's arm. It's a fair question. She looked directly at the prosecutor. I needed more evidence. I needed to understand exactly what they were doing before I could stop it. If I had raised too many alarms too early, they would have simply buried the evidence deeper, and we wouldn't be sitting here now. Patricia Winters studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Continue. For the next 2 hours, Rebecca walked them through her methodical investigation, how she had pieced together the fragments, following the digital breadcrumbs that Mason and Olivia had left, how she had discovered the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the encrypted communications with entities that had no legitimate business with a U.S. cybersecurity firm. The final piece came last week, she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion seeping into her bones. I found evidence that Mason was planning to sell a comprehensive access package to a client based in Moldova. This wasn't just corporate espionage anymore. This was a direct threat to national infrastructure. I knew I had to act. Winters leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Why the gala? Why not come directly to us? Rebecca met her gaze unflinchingly. Because I needed witnesses. I needed it to be public, undeniable. If I had come to you privately, Mason would have had time to destroy evidence, to spin a counter-narrative. He would have painted me as a bitter, unstable wife. And given his connections, his charm, his political donations, there was a real risk he might have succeeded. The room fell silent. The prosecutors exchanged glances. They all knew she was right. In the world of high finance and political influence, men like Mason Hamilton had an uncanny ability to slither out of accountability. Well, Winters said finally, gathering her papers, I think we have what we need for now. Mrs. Hamilton, you will need to remain available for further questioning. This investigation is going to be extensive. Of course, Rebecca said, I'll provide whatever you need. As the prosecutors filed out, Patricia Winters lingered. When they were alone save for Ben, she turned back to Rebecca. Off the record, she said, her official demeanor softening slightly. What you did took extraordinary courage. The public spectacle might have been unorthodox, but it was effective. We've already received calls from 3 other tech companies volunteering to open their books to prove they're not engaged in similar practices. You've sent shockwaves through the entire industry. Rebecca nodded, too tired for pride or satisfaction. I just did what was necessary. Winters gathered the last of her documents. Get some rest, Mitt Hamilton. The storm is just beginning. After she left, Ben turned to Rebecca. She's right, this is going to get worse before it gets better. The media frenzy, the legal battles, the depositions, it's going to be a marathon. Rebecca looked down at her hands, still elegant in their manicure but somehow foreign to her now. The diamond wedding ring she had worn for 20 years glinted in the fluorescent light. With a decisive motion, she twisted it off and placed it on the conference table with a soft clink. Then I should probably change my shoes, she said with the ghost of a smile. I've never been much of a sprinter anyway. Tyler Hamilton sat alone in the headmaster's office of Westbrook Academy. His normally confident posture collapsed in on itself. At 16, he was already showing signs of his father's height and his mother's sharp intelligence. Now he was showing something else entirely, a bewildered pain that made him look much younger than his years. The headmaster, Dr. Evelyn Clark, watched him with concern. Your mother is on her way, Tyler. She should be here within the hour. Tyler nodded mechanically. He hadn't spoken much since they'd called him to the office that morning, since they'd shown him the news. His phone had been confiscated for his own protection. They said as it had been blowing up with messages from classmates, from reporters trying to reach him through social media, from strangers offering sympathy or hurling accusations. His world had imploded overnight. His father, the titan he had idolized, was being called a traitor, a fraud. His mother had been the one to expose him. The family name, which had once opened doors and commanded respect, was now toxic. "Is there anyone else you'd like us to call?" Dr. Clark asked gently. "Your grandparents." "Perhaps," Tyler shook his head. His paternal grandparents were in Europe, probably still blissfully unaware of their son's disgrace. His maternal grandmother had passed years ago. There was no extended family to rally around him. There was just his mother, the woman who had detonated the bomb. A soft knock at the door made him look up. Clark crossed to answer it, exchanged a few quiet words with someone outside, and then stepped back. Rebecca Hamilton entered the room. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman who had always attended his school functions in designer clothes and flawless makeup. This Rebecca was dressed in simple slacks and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Her face was bare of makeup, revealing the dark circles under her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Yet there was a quiet strength in her bearing that he had never noticed before. "Tyler," she said softly. Just his name, nothing more. He stared at her, a tumult of emotions crossing his face of anger, confusion, grief. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice cracking. "Why did you do it like that? Why didn't you warn me?" Dr. Clark discreetly slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her. Rebecca moved forward slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. She sat in the chair next to him, not touching him, respecting the invisible barrier of his anger. "I couldn't warn you, Tyler. I couldn't warn anyone. If word had gotten back to your father, he would have destroyed the evidence. People would have been hurt, more people than already have been." "But it's Dad," Tyler said, his voice rising in distress. "You destroyed him in front of everyone. Do you know what they're saying online? Do you know what they're saying about us?" Rebecca's face contorted with pain. "I know, and I'm so sorry you have to go through this. But Tyler, what your father was doing..." "He said you're crazy," Tyler cut in, the words spilling out now. "He called me this morning. He said you've always been jealous of his success, that you've been trying to undermine him for years. He said you made everything up." Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. Of course Mason had reached out to their son. Of course he was already spinning his narrative. "What do you believe, Tyler?" she asked quietly. He looked away, tears welling in his eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Everything's falling apart." Rebecca took a deep breath. "I need to show you something. Ben, my lawyer, didn't want me to, but I think you deserve to know the truth." She pulled a tablet from her bag and set it on the desk between them. "This is a secure device. What I'm about to show you is evidence that will be used in the federal case against your father." Tyler stared at the tablet with apprehension. "You don't have to look," Rebecca said. "But if you want to understand why I did what I did, it's all here." Slowly, almost reluctantly, Tyler reached for the tablet. Rebecca entered a passcode and stepped back, giving him space. For the next 20 minutes, she watched in silence as her son scrolled through document after document, financial records, encrypted communications, security vulnerabilities deliberately coded into the Hamilton Innovations flagship products. The evidence was irrefutable, laid out in clinical detail. Mason's own words, in emails and memos, damned him completely. Tyler's face paled as he read. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different, harder, older. "The Cayman account," he said, his voice flat. "The password is my birthday." Rebecca nodded, the pain of this particular betrayal still fresh. "Yes. He used my birthday as the password for his secret account where he kept money from selling out his own clients." Tyler's voice was incredulous, rising with a new anger. "Who does that? Someone who never thought he would be caught." Rebecca said quietly. Someone who believed his own lies so completely that he couldn't imagine a world where he wasn't in control. Tyler set the tablet down carefully, as if it might explode. He was silent for a long time, processing. Rebecca waited, knowing that whatever came next would define their relationship for years to come. "What happens now?" he finally asked, his voice small but steadier. "Now we rebuild," Rebecca said simply. "It won't be easy. The name Hamilton is going to be a burden for a while. We'll lose the houses, the money, the status. People will talk, but we'll survive. Tyler, we'll start over. Will Dad go to prison?" The question hung in the air, stark and unavoidable. Rebecca didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes, I believe he will. The evidence is overwhelming. And there are national security implications that make this more serious than just financial fraud." Tyler nodded slowly, processing this new reality. "He lied to me. All those times he took me to the office, showed me around, told me I would run it someday. It was all based on a lie. Your father loves you." "Tyler," Rebecca said, the words difficult but necessary. "That part isn't a lie. He lost his way. He started believing that the rules didn't apply to him, that his brilliance entitled him to more." "Like Lady Macbeth," Tyler said unexpectedly. "We're studying it in English. Ambition that consumes everything." Rebecca almost smiled at the literary reference. Her son, finding meaning in chaos through books, just as she always had. "Something like that, yes." Tyler looked at her directly then, his young face serious. "Are you going to be okay financially? I mean," the question surprised her. In the midst of his own turmoil, he was worried about her. "We'll be fine. I made sure of that. I have my own accounts that aren't tied to the company. We won't be billionaires anymore, but we won't be destitute." "And what about you? What will you do now?" Rebecca hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. The last 24 hours had been about survival, about justice. The future was a luxury she hadn't yet indulged in. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But whatever it is, I'll do it honestly. That's the promise I'm making to you. Tyler, no more lies, no more facades." He was quiet again, thinking. Finally, he stood up, his tall frame unfolding from the chair. Rebecca rose as well, uncertain, afraid to hope. Without a word, Tyler stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. It was an awkward embrace, the hug of a teenage boy who was trying to be a man, but it was real. Rebecca held him tightly, feeling the tears she had suppressed for so long finally break free. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his shoulder. "I'm so sorry it had to be this way." "I know," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I know, Mom." They stood like that for a long moment, mother and son, survivors in the wreckage of a life that had been built on deception. When they finally broke apart, something had shifted between them. The worst was still ahead: the trials, the media scrutiny, the adjustment to a new reality, but they would face it together. Dr. Clark knocked softly before re-entering. "Tyler's things are packed," she said gently, "and we've arranged for a private exit to avoid any unwanted attention." Rebecca nodded gratefully. "Thank you for your discretion. Westbrook stands by its students, Hamilton," the headmaster said firmly. "Tyler's place here is secure, regardless of circumstances." The implication was clear despite the scandal. Despite the inevitable financial changes, Tyler's scholarship would be honored. It was a small mercy in a merciless situation. As they walked through the quiet back hallways of the school, Tyler asked, "Where are we going?" "A friend's house in Connecticut," Rebecca replied. "Ben arranged it. It's private, secure. We can regroup there, figure out our next steps." Tyler nodded, adjusting the backpack on his shoulder. "Will we ever go back to the apartment? I mean," Rebecca thought of the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the place that had never quite felt like home despite its opulence. "I don't think so. Tyler, that life is over." As they approached the service exit, Rebecca saw a sleek black car waiting, Ben Carter standing beside it. The morning sun glinted off its polished surface, a new day rising over a landscape forever altered by the truth. "Ready?" she asked her son. Tyler took a deep breath and squared his shoulders, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made Rebecca's heart clench. But when he spoke, the words were all his own. "Yeah," he said, "let's build something real this time." The media frenzy reached a fever pitch within days. The Hamilton scandal had everything: wealth, betrayal, corporate espionage, and a healthy dose of public humiliation. Talk shows dissected Rebecca's motives. Financial analysts calculated the collateral damage to the tech sector, and internet sleuths combed through every available photo of the couple, looking for signs of the fracture that had led to such a spectacular implosion. Rebecca watched none of it. In the sanctuary of the Connecticut estate, a sprawling, secluded property owned by one of Ben's clients, who was abroad, she and Tyler established a new routine. Mornings were for dealing with the endless parade of legal documents that required her attention. Afternoons were for Tyler's remote schoolwork, arranged by Dr. Clark to minimize disruption to his education. Evenings were for healing, for quiet conversations on the veranda overlooking the pristine grounds, for beginning to rebuild their relationship without Mason's overshadowing presence. It was during one such evening, 12 days after the gala, that Ben Carter arrived with news that would alter their trajectory once again. "Sorry to interrupt your piece," he said, settling into a wicker chair on the veranda, accepting the glass of iced tea Rebecca offered. "But there's a development you need to know about." Rebecca tensed. "Mason?" "No, he's still maintaining his innocence, still out on bail. His legal team is formidable, but they're fighting a losing battle. The evidence is too strong." Ben set his briefcase on the table and extracted a sleek folder. "This is something else entirely." He handed the folder to Rebecca. The logo on its cover was unfamiliar to her, a stylized shield with the words Sentinel Group embossed in silver. "What is this?" she asked, opening it to find a formal letter addressed to her. "An opportunity." Ben said simply, "The Sentinel Group is a new consortium formed by several of your former clients, Sterling Cooper Capital, Vidian, Mayfield Logistics, and a few others. They've been left vulnerable by Hamilton Innovation's collapse. The security infrastructure they relied on is compromised. They need a solution. Fast." Rebecca skimmed the letter, her eyes widening as she grasped what was being proposed. "They want me to build a new security platform." "They want you to build a new company," Ben corrected. "They're offering startup capital, infrastructure support, and client commitments. They want you, Rebecca the architect, not the wife, to create something that actually delivers on the promise of unbreachable security." She stared at him, then back at the letter. The figures being discussed were substantial, not Hamilton Innovation substantial, but significant enough to represent a genuine second chance. "Why would they trust me?" she asked, bewildered. "After everything that's happened, why would anyone in the industry want to be associated with the Hamilton name?" Ben smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "They don't want the Hamilton name. They want yours, your maiden name." Rebecca blinked, taken aback. It had been so long since she had thought of herself as Rebecca Mitchell, the brilliant coder from MIT who had once dreamed of changing the world through technology. "They're calling it Mitchell Systems." Ben continued. "They want you as CTO, with full autonomy over the security architecture. No compromises, no backdoors, no secret agendas, just what you always intended to build in the first place." The proposition was dizzying. A chance to reclaim her original vision, to step out of Mason's shadow, not just personally but professionally, to build something that truly reflected her values, her expertise. "I don't know, Ben," she said, her voice uncertain. "The timing, it feels opportunistic. Using the scandal to launch a competitor. It's business." Ben acknowledged, "These companies need what you can provide, but it's also a vindication. They've seen the evidence." "Rebecca, They know you were the brains behind the original code. They're betting on you, not despite what happened, but because of it, because you chose integrity over comfort, truth over power. She closed the folder, needing time to process. I'll think about it. Don't think too long, Ben advised. The tech world abhors a vacuum. Someone will fill the space Hamilton Innovations left behind. It might as well be you. After Ben left, Rebecca sat alone on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mitchell Systems, her name, her vision, her terms. It was tempting a path forward that would transform her from victim to founder, from the woman who brought down a corrupt empire to the woman who built a better one in its place. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Tyler approach until he spoke. "You should do it," he said, sliding into the chair beside her. She looked up, startled. "Sorry, I overheard. The walls in this place echo." "Tyler, it's complicated. The timing, the perception." "It's not complicated," he interrupted, with the clarity of youth. "They need what you can build. You need a purpose. It fits." He gestured to the folder. "Besides, Mitchell Systems sounds way cooler than Hamilton Innovations." Despite everything, Rebecca laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine. "You think so?" "Definitely was like a fresh start for both of us." His expression grew more serious. "You always said that when I was young. You stepped back from your career to give Dad space to build his. Maybe now it's your turn." Rebecca looked at her son with new eyes. When had he grown so wise, so perceptive in the crucible of the last 2 weeks? Something in Tyler had been tempered, refined. The entitled boy of privilege was giving way to a young man of substance. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words difficult to say aloud. "What if I fail? What if I can't deliver what they're expecting?" Tyler's response was immediate and confident. "You won't fail. You're the architect. Remember, that's what you called yourself on stage. The architect. You know how to build things that last." The architect, the title she had claimed in her moment of greatest vulnerability and strength. Not the wife, not the victim, but the creator, the builder. Rebecca reached for her phone, making a decision. "I'll call Ben in the morning. Tell him I want to meet with the Sentinel group." Tyler smiled, a genuine expression that reminded her of his younger self, before the weight of the scandal had pressed down on him. "Good, I think it's time we both built something new." As darkness fell over the Connecticut estate, Rebecca found herself mentally sketching the foundations of a new security protocol, one built on transparency and genuine protection. For the first time since the gala, she felt the stirrings of something that felt dangerously like hope. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a warning bell sounded. Mason was still out there, wounded but dangerous. The battle for justice had been won, but the war was far from over. And in the shadows of the digital world they both inhabited, new threats were already taking shape, drawn to the chaos created by Hamilton Innovations' fall. The next phase of Rebecca's journey was just beginning, and it would test every ounce of her newfound strength.